After another huge win for the Detroit Lions, they become the biggest story for the rest of the week. We got all that and much more for you as we cover the NFL here on the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show.
NFL analyst Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson bring you expert NFL analysis every day in less than 30 minutes. Get an inside look at the NFL on the field and in the front office with elite breakdowns to next-level analysis and in-depth information only for the real NFL fans. This is Peacock and Williamson, and it starts now.
What's going on, football fans? Welcome in to another episode of Peacock and Williamson. We are your hosts, Matt Williamson, former NFL scout, myself, Ross Jackson, in for Brian Peacock today, who is out. And on today's episode, we're going to break down some of the biggest stories from around the National Football League. If there's any team out there that needs not only a new year, but a new me, it's the Indianapolis Colts. Officially eliminated from the playoffs. We'll dive into the culture there that might be in shambles. The culture, Matt, Colt.
No, I see what you're doing there. Okay.
See what I did there? We'll dive into some of these playoff clinching scenarios. Tampa, Denver, as well as the Baltimore Ravens all control their destiny. But some other teams still have some doors open to get in. And one team has a very unfavorable one over in Atlanta. We'll dive into that. We're going to lead everything off here with the Lions, who remain the team to beat with a 40-34 victory over the San Francisco 49ers. And what lies ahead is an absolutely legendary NFL matchup for that team and for all of us NFL fans. We appreciate you very much for being here with us, making us your first your first listen, and for being an everydayer here on the show as we kick off Peacock and Williamson on a Tuesday. Matt, the Lions still look like the team to beat. They tie or break their franchise record for most wins in a season, and now they have a humongous matchup on the way. What have you liked about this Detroit Lions team so far this season?
An awful lot. Let's just touch on the game real quick from last night, though. I mean, I thought it was really, really a fun game. Neither team, quote, had anything to play for, but there's definitely a hierarchy, NFC rivalry, pride. I mean, it made it fun as a viewer. These players took it really, really seriously. And frankly, the Niners went toe-to-toe with them. I mean, in a game where you lost by 6 points, your field goal kicker was 0 for 2. We can do the math there. That's an even Steven game. And you were -2 in turnovers, 2 picks by Purdy. So really, I mean, on a play-by-play basis, this was a pretty even game. Now, I don't want to rain on the parade, but I have great respect for Campbell, his staff, their approach. I love that there's a lot of guys on that staff that are recent former players. The defensive coordinator, Deuce Staley, Randall L. I think that they have a toughness, a player's mentality, the ability to really communicate with the current players extremely well. But I have a massive concern about this team, and it's all those things rolled into one. And they kind of touched on it last night, but I've been talking about this for a couple weeks. They had the earliest bye week in the league. And yes, energy and aggression and biting kneecaps is wonderful, but it's hard. It's wonderful. Yeah, that's what old school football is about. Great. But it's hard to keep the accelerator down every week for that long. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
it's
for
rolling to, I love Coach Campbell, but man, I got to exhale once in a while. This guy is a lunatic, and I know some people that have been associated with teams like that. It's just hard to finish the marathon whenever you're sprinting the whole time. You know what I mean? And you're seeing it on defense, and I just have some concerns. I would have sat everybody last night,
Yeah, it's one of the most injured teams in the NFL, especially over on the defensive side. I think it's like 15 players like that they've had injuries, 7 of which were starters and everything. So certainly they're feeling all that. But what would help? What would help, Matt, is a first round bye in the playoffs, right? Wouldn't that be something? And that's what is on the line next weekend in what is going to be an electrifying Sunday night football game, or at least let's call it a highly anticipated Sunday night football game, because we've seen this before, Matt. I'll give you an anecdote here in a sec. But
okay.
2 14-2 teams set to go up against each other, most wins combined in a matchup. The winner of that team becomes the ninth ever 15-win team in NFL history. The loser of that game ends up becoming a 14-win wild card team, which would be the most wins for a wild card opponent. This is going to be an insane kind of matchup between these two teams who are division rivals. It's the last game of the season. Like Matt, if you needed any proof of a script for the NFL, this game would be the one that anybody would hold up and say, you see, there's a script here. But this is something no one expected and no one knew was going to happen. Matt, the last time that we saw something like this was in 1990. The last time I can remember something like this was in 1990. It was the New York Giants and the San Francisco 49ers. Both teams started their season 10-0, lost their 11th game, went into their game 10-1, and it was this highly anticipated matchup. And Matt, they scored a total of 10 points in that game. Wow. That game ended up being 7-3. So hopefully it's not a stinker, or let's call it a defensive slugfest, which is really what it was. It was a great defensive game if you're that kind of guy, and Matt, you and I both are. Absolutely. But this game has all of the signs of a high-flying, high-scoring type of matchup.
It does, and I don't recall that meeting from 1990, but if it was that late in the year in San Francisco or New York, there probably was some sort of weather involved.
Good point.
And this one won't be. I mean, this is just going to be guns a-blazing, St. Brown, Jefferson, Darnold, Goff, all playing fast in a dome, which is wonderful to me. And unlike that matchup, back in 1990, the loser has to go on the road. I mean,
that's right. That's right.
I mean, you don't even get to win your division. I assume the Giants and Niners won their division that year. I mean, this loser has to probably go to Tampa or whatever. And all of a sudden, that's a losable situation. And I mean, Detroit's been like number one in power ranks all along. But and I'm not going to say, boy, you guys kept the accelerator down too much. But if you lose this one and then you go to Tampa, it's like, we're in big trouble all of a sudden. We're in the deep end with Sharks when we were really comfortable a couple minutes ago.
Yeah, absolutely. This one ends up having some major implications for the losing team for sure. And just to confirm, yes, both of those teams, the 49ers and Giants that year in 1990 did win their division.
I would hope.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so it'd be a major turn. Otherwise, the Philadelphia Eagles finished with 10 wins that season. So if the Giants would have went on a nosedive, maybe Philly could have caught up with them. But the 49ers are pretty safe throughout that season. But man, this is going to be a really good one. And look, I know a lot of people have said, hey, the Lions gave up 34 points to, a San Francisco 49ers team that didn't have Christian McCaffrey and all of this stuff. But I'll tell you, Minnesota ain't got no Christian McCaffrey either. Like, they've got good weapons, but you know what I mean? So like when we look at what San Francisco was missing on the offensive side versus what Detroit was missing on the defensive side, and then look at what Minnesota will bring to the table, it's pretty similar in terms of what the matchup is. So I think this is going to be an evenly contested matchup. It's just, can that Detroit Lions defense that's so banged up, so injured, can they stay on top and end up finding a way to give Ben Johnson's offense the opportunity to outscore Sam Darnold and Kevin O'Connell, who have been on fire this season?
Yeah, and we're getting ahead of it here on a Tuesday, but I mean, that's the talk of the whole week. Breaking down all these matchups, and that's too. I semi disagree with you. I think the Vikings have better I think the Vikings have better personnel than the current version of the Niners. I'll take Aaron Jones, I'll take Jefferson, Hawkinson. I'm not the Kittle's bad at all. But to your point, two of the elite schemers, Shanahan, who had nothing to lose and just wanted to knock off the Lions, and in Minnesota is another elite offensive schemer that is, I'm sure, grinding it right now, finding weaknesses in that Lions defense. So I can't wait. I mean, we might even get like David Montgomery back for this game.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, there's a couple guys looming that might be back in the mix for Detroit, possibly.
Yeah, right on time for Detroit. Coming up next, right on time for a lot of teams that are looking to solidify their playoff scenarios. We got a few teams that control their destiny, but one team that's going to be rooting for a bitter rival. We got that coming up for you next. So continue on with the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Peacock and Williamson is brought to you by our friends over at Rocket Money. When's the last time that you used Rocket Money and they ended up finding a bunch of unwanted subscriptions that you completely forgot about and ended up saving you a bunch of money? Well, the answer for me when it comes to that question is like 2 weeks ago. Rocket Money has been awesome for me because of their ability to go through, scan, find those unwanted subscriptions, and don't pretend like you don't have them. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking you don't. I thought the same thing. You do. You have them too. Let Rocket Money help you out in terms of being able to find and put an end to that situation for you, save you some money in the process. They also have a really cool couple of other features. I love their goals feature, which lets you set up some financial goals and they end up taking some money out, putting it aside for you so you don't have to spend your time doing the monthly budgeting thing, all of that. So get rid of those unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money today. Just head over to rocketmoney.com/locked-on to get started. That's rocketmoney.com/locked-on, rocketmoney.com/locked-on. All right, everybody, continuing on with the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show here on a Tuesday, and we're looking at some playoff clinching scenarios. Matt, here's the way that this all breaks down, right? We'll start with the AFC. Denver and Baltimore both control their destiny, but there are a few other teams that are going to be.
I'm sorry, Ross. I got to stop you. I mean, sometimes
please.
I got to correct BP too.
Yeah.
No one controls their destiny. You control your fate. Your destiny is pre-written.
I love it.
I'm sorry. Everyone makes that mistake.
I love it. Control their fate. I'm all about it. I'm all about it. All right. So here we go. So we got Denver and Baltimore in the AFC that control their fate, right? They're
sure
winning in this situation. They win and they're in. Pittsburgh, on the other hand, needs a win along with the Baltimore loss. So let's start with the Pittsburgh and Baltimore sort of situation here. The AFC North, you're very familiar.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at these two matchups, you've got the Baltimore Ravens who are going up against the Cleveland Browns. You've got the Pittsburgh Steelers that are finishing their season against the Cincinnati Bengals. Who truly has the tougher path to that playoff fate?
So both these teams are in. They're going to the playoffs. I mean, all that really matters for the Ravens.
Seeding stuff, right?
Yeah. And winning the division. I mean, the Steelers, the only way they can win the division, Baltimore loses to the Browns, Steelers beat the Bengals. It's possible. The Steelers could also fall to the 6th seed if they lose and the Chargers win. So the Ravens win, they're the 3, they win the division. Well, I just saw that the Ravens are 18.5-point favorites against the Browns.
Jeez.
So that seems unlikely, you know.
My goodness, FanDuel, why you got to do them like that?
Right. But I guess DTR could be so terrible that they put Winston in, and Winston can beat anybody. And he beat the Ravens earlier in the year. He beat the Steelers earlier in the year. He could throw 5 picks, but he could throw 5 touchdowns. And
5 touchdowns just as quickly.
From a Steeler perspective, I hope Jameis gets a start and he throws it 60 times in that game. But as you know, and as the listeners know, these are the 2 Saturday games. And appropriately, they had Ravens-Browns go first because if the Ravens win it, they're done. You know, otherwise, the Steelers are going to play hard no matter what. The Bengals are going to play hard no matter what. So the second game sets up really well, even if the Ravens win by 50, you know, which I think they probably will.
So that would set them up in the best scenario there. Now, let's look at the other AFC scenario, which is a complete mess. Not a mess, but there's just a lot that can happen with this one. We've got so Cincinnati, who, of course, is playing Pittsburgh, as we just mentioned. They can clinch a playoff berth if they win, Denver loses, and Miami loses or ties. Miami is going to be going up against the New York Jets. In a scenario in which Miami wins, they would need Denver to lose, and then they could be in. So if Miami wins and Denver loses, they're in. If Miami and Denver both lose and Cincinnati wins, they would be in. Simply put, if the Broncos win, they clinch their playoff berth. So let's look at
the short answer.
Who are going up. That's the short answer. Yeah.
Right.
And so there's also all these tie scenarios and things like that can happen as well. But Denver is going up against the 15-1 Kansas City Chiefs. If I'm the Kansas City Chiefs, I ain't playing nobody.
I don't think they're going to.
Yeah. I'm good on that situation.
Right. Now, that doesn't mean they couldn't sneak one out. You know, Carson Wentz is a free agent at the end of the year, kind of like Winston. He could, you know, do some good things here and sneak out a win. And they got mojo on their side. And it's also easy. I probably should have said this a week ago on this podcast. It's easy for a lot of teams to say, oh, we're going to rest everyone. But you still have to put 5 offensive linemen on the field.
That's it.
And preferably
you can only have
Right.
Yeah, you can only have 46 plus 2 practice squad guys active. Like, you can't do that much.
I mean, so you're probably starting Creed Humphrey and some of those dudes at least, half the game. I mean, you're going to sit Kelsey. You're probably going to sit Hopkins because he's older, of course. Mahomes won't see a helmet. Chris Jones is already banged up. But it's hard. It's not like, college where you can just set 22 starters. So if this game's interesting at halftime, maybe Wentz pulls it out. But the short answer is Denver wins. They get in, and it's a game they should win, considering who's going to be on the field,
Yeah. And look, Denver has not been a bad football team by any stretch of the imagination this year either. So even with all the starters in with Kansas City, Denver has found a way to be competitive in games. So one way or another, I think you're looking at something there. And look, Kansas City's pulled out a lot of close games. So Cincinnati and Pittsburgh will be settled before this game happens. So I think that is something to keep in mind here too. You'll know whether or not Cincinnati is still alive by the time the kickoff happens here, more so for the fan or the viewer than it doesn't really matter for the teams. But Miami,
I think they're the team people want to see in. I mean, I think people want Burrow in ahead of Miami or Denver, but they just need three things to happen, which makes it tough.
Yeah, it makes it really, really tough. And I'll tell you what, I'm on the other side of that. I want Sean Payton in the playoffs any day, anytime. Sean Payton's pettiness in the playoffs just gets cranked up to 11, and it's so much fun to watch. It's great TV. The other thing that we're looking at here is, of course, Miami, who will be playing at the same time as Denver and Kansas City. They'll be taking on the New York Jets. They should have an easier path to victory out of any of these other teams when it comes to their opponent. The Jets have not been very good. DJ Reed already telling reporters that he's ready to be a free agent. Can't wait to see what's next for him. Things like that, like wants to be out of the building and everything. Yeah. But in order for them to get in, they need to win, and they need that Denver loss. So we'll see what happens for the Miami Dolphins there.
The Jets' performance this past week was about as sad as it gets.
Oh man, I mean, that was really bad. It was like watching Mike Tyson round 6, 7, 8, and 9 and 10 against Jake Paul. Like it was that was rough, man. It was like they didn't give up. They just had nothing left.
There was nothing
I mean?
Like it was old.
Yeah. It's one thing when you can say that they weren't playing with effort. It's another thing when you can say that they're playing with effort and look like that. Like that's maybe
pretty rough.
Sometimes you got to wonder which of the coach speak to you sometimes, you know what I mean?
No question.
We already broke down the Detroit Lions and the Minnesota Vikings, the situation that happens there. Winner gets in by winning the division. The other one ends up being the record-holding most win wild card team. But let's look at this interesting scenario in the NFC South, Matt. Can we?
I know you're excited about it. Yeah.
This is so good. This is so poetic. So poetic. So listen, I'm going to say this first. I obviously cover the New Orleans Saints. I cover the NFC South. I ranked before the season began. My division finish prediction was Tampa finishes on top, Atlanta finishes number 2, New Orleans finishes number 3, and then the Carolina Panthers finish number 4. That was my division prediction. So far, it looks like that might be exactly how things pan out. But Tampa is a win and in situation. That would force basically the finish that we just talked about effectively. Unless Carolina pulls off an upset, they could actually potentially leap New Orleans in a certain situation there. But the Atlanta Falcons need the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to lose, and they need to win in order for them to clinch that NFC South title and get into the playoffs. The poetic situation here for me, Matt, is that the Atlanta Falcons and Atlanta Falcons fans now have to root for the New Orleans Saints to win a football game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in order for them to get into the playoffs, which is a beautiful thing on two different levels. These two teams are obviously bitter rivals, so this is a lot of fun to see. And number two, it's not going to happen. Like the Saints are not going to beat the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. You can want it all you want, Atlanta, but the door, I don't know, is going to be very open for you.
Like, I bet you're hoping, and I would if I were in your shoes, because I'm not a nice person, I guess, is Saints play them tough all the way down the end. It goes to overtime. The kick to win it, and oops, I shagged it. Sorry. We're going to keep the good draft pick.
And I wrote what I wrote about this game was the best case scenario is almost exactly what you just said, that the Saints play a tough, hotly competitive game that they come up just short in, get an opportunity to audition themselves for their head coach search, all those other things, show off some of their young talent, yada, yada, but then lose so that Atlanta can't get in and that they have a little bit of an ability to potentially improve their draft situation. So good.
And that'd be great.
Such a good scenario.
Real quick, who do you think's the better football team, Bucs or Falcons, today on New Year's Eve? Happy New Year's Eve, everyone, by the way.
Happy New Year's Eve, everybody. Today, I think I'd have to say I got to go with the Bucs. I have to go with the Bucs. Really it's not because I think Atlanta's bad. Like, Atlanta's in this position for a reason. Like, let's be real. Like, I'll crack all the jokes that I want and all this stuff and have fun. But like, for the fact of the matter is that, like, they're in this situation for a reason. But I think when you have that rookie quarterback starting, as we know very well here in New Orleans, you already get such a big question mark around. But the Bucs have found something with Baker Mayfield, just threw 5 touchdowns last week. They found something in the run game with Bucky Irving. The defense is, I think, a little bit better maybe than Atlanta's defense from what I've seen. And so I think I would give the Bucs the edge. Yeah,
and quarterback's a big one for me.
Huge.
Yeah,
huge. Yeah, absolutely. All right, coming up next, let's take a look at the Indianapolis Colts. BP and Matt have been breaking down the teams that have been getting eliminated. The Colts are officially eliminated, and the culture in Indianapolis is under fire. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with the Peacock Williamson NFL Show, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, everybody, wrapping up the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show here on a Tuesday. Thank you very much for being here with us, making us your first listen. Don't forget to go and check out Locked On NFL, Locked On Dynasty Football, Locked On Fantasy Football. Recap your fantasy seasons over with the best fantasy coverage you're going to get every single day. And we'll be back here with you tomorrow with our mailbags. Make sure you send us questions at Williamson NFL, at Ross Jackson Nola. We'll get you your questions answered, and then we'll get into our 6-pack on Thursday. So lots of good stuff coming up for you here on the Peacock Williamson NFL Show. Make sure that you are tuning in every single Monday through Friday as we are here every day. Matt, the Indianapolis Colts feel like a team that are an absolute shambles. We're hearing stuff about, obviously Pat McAfee doing his kind of written diatribe around where the Indianapolis Colts are, all the accusations around Anthony Richardson tapping out of games and all these other things, team playing without effort, all that, looking aimless, yada, yada, lack of accountability. These are things that we typically hear about bad teams. What do you know about a bad culture with an NFL team and how it impacts that franchise?
Usually starts with ownership. And I think that's a very volatile ownership group, and people usually don't look that high. But I mean, this has been a volatile ownership group that was, had the Peyton Mannings of the world or those guys to kind of buffer it from their team. Yeah. And frankly, I think this team could use a Cam Hayward or a Cam Jordan, to go look at our teams. One of those type of guys. I mean, I'm sure Buckner has some of that, but like, who's the big time? Who are we most afraid of? Who's in charge of the locker room? I think that would go a long way. And they kind of went down that road with like Matt Ryan and Phillip Rivers, but they couldn't play anymore. I mean, it's not the same. You can't ask Richardson to be that guy. Maybe it's Quentin Nelson and I don't know it or whatever. But kind of what we've been doing with these teams is like, we started with Christmas. What Christmas presents are we going to give the teams that are out of it? And I look at the Colts and think, and this goes back to culture, I think they have an offensive coordinator as a head coach and a good offensive coordinator, but I don't see him as a head coach. And his best buddy's his defensive coordinator who plays Legion of Boom cover 3 like it's 10 years ago. And they're the most predictable defense in the league. And they don't have Earl Thomas and Sherman and Wagner.
Yeah, you got to have the players for that, right?
Right. It's not a real, schemed up defense. It's an execution-based defense. So I don't think there's going to be a head coaching change. I would strongly consider one, but I doubt that happens. So the way I would approach, or my Christmas gifts to the Colts would be, is if you're going to live with this head coach, you have to totally redo what you're doing on the defensive side of the ball. Go find an innovative young defensive coordinator that'll bring a multitude of blitzes, more man coverage, etc. I need a well-versed scheme. Somebody bright, young, maybe a former player, that's in his late 30s that has head coach written all over him.
Sounds a lot like an Anthony Weaver type.
Yeah, great one. Those types. And then I would do something like this in the offseason. I would go sign Justin Fields and say, you and Richardson are my quarterbacks. I'm going to buy into this style of quarterback 1,000%, at least for a year or so. No more Flacco, they couldn't be any more different, and if Richardson, if you can't get any better, Maybe Fields does, and he's not going to be crazy expensive. And then almost all my other offseason resources are going to defense. I'm getting this new defensive coordinator, every piece he wants. First round pick, second round pick, biggest free agent addition, whatever you need. I basically a somewhat blank checkbook with my remaining resources other than backup / quarterback to fight with Richardson,
Yeah. That's a really good thing. So what I did there is I wrote down New Year's resolutions for the for the Indianapolis Colts. The first one is to fix their defensive scheme, right? It sounds like modernizing the defensive scheme is the route that they could go, or at least a more innovative scheme. Signing Justin Fields, which I think is excellent, and then going out and getting that new defensive coordinator the pieces that he wants, therefore building up that defense. So I kind of wrote them down as New Year's resolutions. And I'll tell you what, man, there's an interesting thing that happened here in New Orleans last weekend, up against, which was the final home game of the season, up against the Las Vegas Raiders, where there was a lot of attention around defensive end Cameron Jordan, who you brought up. His whole family was in attendance. The Saints social media team was all about Cam. He led before every game, somebody goes out as a player and leads the who dat chant, and everybody chants who dat said he gonna beat them Saints. And that's like a big thing, big honor that players get to do. He went out, he did the coin toss, all this other stuff. He stayed on the field 2 hours after the game. Now, he told us in the locker room, I think I have the quote written down because it was a great quote. He told us in the locker room, until my love runs dry or until they tell me otherwise, I'm here. But he's absolutely left the door open for the team to potentially make a different decision than the decision that he would make, right? He's been very much about like, I want to finish my career here in New Orleans. How good a fit, let's just play the hypothetical. I think he's back in New Orleans next season. He's either back in New Orleans or he's doing a media job as far as I look at it. But let's just operate in the hypothetical. How good a piece would he be in a situation like what the Indianapolis Colts might be looking to rebuild or claw their way out of?
Someone similar, or a Calais Campbell, or you know what I mean? Somebody like that is up for Walter Payton Mans of the Year and has been around the block and that type of guy. And first off, it would be the coordinator hire. But if the coordinator comes from New Orleans, hypothetical, then I'm taking Cam with me. But I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of these type examples that I'm going to walk in as a young, bright coordinator, and I'm going to bring this big dog with me who might not bite. Right. I mean, he can still bite, but maybe he doesn't run as well as he used to, I mean, and just kind of this is how we play defense in my scheme, and we can find a lot of those type of guys,
Yeah. The Washington Commanders did it.
Yeah, exactly. Bobby Wagner is a perfect example.
Yep. Bobby Wagner.
Yeah.
Yep. That's exactly what I was about to mention.
Perfect example.
Dan Quinn shows up. He says, all right, I know what I want this defense to look like. One returning defensive starter from 2023 for that team. And he brings in a Bobby Wagner to help circle the wagons and be that leader over there and everything like that. I think it's an effective way, right? We can point to the examples and say, hey, here's how this works. And
that Washington example is perfect. That's the exact blueprint I'm looking for. Yeah.
And look, you're looking for somebody to be able to come in and help to kind of revitalize a culture. Did anybody have a worse culture than the Washington Commanders? You know what I mean? Like
exactly.
I don't think it gets any worse than that. So there's hope there if you're an Indianapolis Colts fan. There's hope there for you for sure. It's not all said and done just yet. All right, Matt. Excellent stuff. We will be back with you tomorrow with our mailbag. Make sure you send your questions again at Williamson NFL. You can send them over to at Ross Jacksonola. If you're watching us on YouTube, you can leave it in the YouTube comments as well. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you are catching us on YouTube. If you're finding us over on your favorite podcast platform, make sure that you're following and that you're getting all those notifications every time a new episode of Peacock Williamson NFL Show comes out. For Matt Williamson, I am Ross Jackson. We will see you here tomorrow, and we thank you very much for making us your first listen and for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.